Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and I am delighted to welcome you to episode 604 of People Behind the Science. This week, we are thrilled to be rebroadcasting our interview with Professor Dame Kay Davies. If you haven't met Kay yet, listeners, she is an eminent geneticist and one of the world's foremost experts on the genetic basis of neuromuscular and neurological disorders. She is particularly well known for her work in developing screening tests for Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy and research on treatments for this disease. In addition, Kay is dedicated to exploring the ethical implications of her research and enhancing the public's understanding of science. And in our interview, Kay discusses her career, her life, and more. So listeners, get ready to be inspired in this episode of People Behind the Science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of People Behind the Science. I am delighted to be here today with Professor Dame Kay Davies. Kay is the Dr. Lees Professor of Anatomy at Oxford University and a Fellow of Hertford College. She is also the Honorary Director of the MRC Functional Genomics Unit, a Deputy Chairman of the Wellcome Trust, and Executive Editor of the journal Human Molecular Genetics. Kay is also co-founder of a biotechnology company and is the director of another. She completed her undergraduate studies at Somerville College and served as a junior research fellow at Wolfson College in Oxford. She then completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the Saclay Nuclear Research Center and went on to serve as a research fellow at St. Mary's Hospital Medical School and at John Radcliffe Hospital. Kay then served as a faculty member at John Radcliffe Hospital and the University of London before joining the faculty at Oxford. Now, Kay has received many awards and honors during her career, and just to name a few, she was elected as a founding fellow of the Academy of Medical Sciences and a fellow of the Royal Society. She was also named Commander of the Order of the British Empire and then Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. Kay is also an honorary fellow of Somerville College and had the honor of giving the inaugural Rose Lecture at Kingston University in 2012 and the Harveian Oration at the Royal College of Physicians in 2013. Now, Kay is here with us today to tell us all about her journey through life and science. So, Kay, we are so excited to get to know you today, both as a scientist, but also as a person. So can you take a minute to tell our listeners what you like to do when you're not doing science?
Walking in the English countryside, preferably when it's not raining, but also music. I'm very fond of just listening to music. I do play the piano, but not very well. But I enjoy doing that privately. I enjoy listening to music, going to concerts.
Wonderful. What kind of music do you like?
Well, mostly classical, actually. But I'm a great Mozart fan, so...
Wonderful. Well, I love that. I'm a violinist myself, so I can really get into the classical music. Well, Kay, it's great to hear about you and what you like to do when you're outside of the lab. But can you tell us now a little bit more about your scientific side and how you describe what you do to someone who's not in science?
I today would say that I use the latest genetics techniques, because most people have heard of genetics, to help find effective treatments for muscular dystrophy. And in particular, I've spent the last 30 years studying a particular muscular dystrophy called Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, which is one of the most common ones. It affects only boys. It's a terrible disease because they have progressive muscle wasting. They are in a wheelchair by 11, and they die in their 20s. Late 20s usually these days, but even so, it's a horrible muscle wasting disease that at the moment we can do nothing about.
Certainly. Well, it sounds like you are doing some amazing research in the lab to address some of these really important questions related to this disease. So fantastic to hear that. Now, with all these things that you're trying to balance in the lab, as well as the things that you like to do outside of the lab, kind of relax, take some walks, enjoy some music, I know it's hard for scientists to balance it all often. And I'm always curious about what motivates people to get so much done in a day. So, Kay, can you tell us, do you have a favorite motivational quote or a saying that you love to keep in your mind as you go through your everyday?
I think I just remind myself to be tenacious, that what is a difficult problem today is often easily solved the next day. So patience and tenacity keep me going, I guess.
Certainly. I think those are two very important traits for scientists. Make sure you're patient and tenacious, because I think science is definitely a slow process in a lot of cases. It's more of a marathon.
Well, also it changes as well. I mean, the problem changes because something the next day you'll get a result that you didn't expect that completely changes the way you think. And then you think, yes, well, we can move a little bit further along by doing something slightly different. And actually that makes science not boring as well as exciting.
Absolutely. I think it definitely keeps it interesting, and especially as you're answering questions, coming up with more questions every time you answer one. So certainly. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about some of these people who may have motivated you or inspired you along your journey as a scientist?
Well, I did one of my major postdocs with someone called Bob Williamson in London. He had so much energy, it was unbelievable. So one of the things that was really inspiring is you could think of an experiment in the morning, and Bob Williamson would know exactly who to contact to be able to execute that experiment in the afternoon. And I remember in the very early days, in the 1980s, we wanted to purify individual chromosomes in a cell, and that had not been done before. But he knew someone in Glasgow that was developing that technique. So rather than think, well, that was an impossible experiment, we both went up there, talked to Brian, and set up a collaboration to do exactly that. It was so enabling to think, who in the world can we best collaborate with in order to execute this piece of science? So he was an inspirational mentor from that point of view, because he could always think of a solution to a problem. Nothing was too difficult.
Well, that is wonderful, and a great environment to be in as a young scientist, not have your ideas limited by the current resources of your current lab, to really be able to leverage these connections, leverage these collaborations to answer some really great questions. So that's fantastic. Now, can you take us back to the very beginning, Kay, and tell us what got you excited about science, and maybe what got you excited about genetics and genomics to begin with?
Well, I've always been mathematical, and I think that was obvious from the early days at school. There's no way I was going to be doing French and German. I really was fascinated by mathematics, and in particular my mother had a biological bent. She was very keen on gardening and biology in general, so that was overall encouragement. And I got lots of encouragement at school to follow that through, but it's inspirational teachers. It was the chemistry teacher who inspired me when I was doing, I can't remember what grade it is, whatever country, but when I was 17, I remember that very well. Then when I came to university, I was very fortunate to come into Oxford because the tutorial system allowed me to stretch myself, and they encouraged me again towards what I was interested in rather than what the curriculum dictated I should do. And so I started off in chemistry and ended up in biochemistry. And again, it's inspirational tutors that encourage you to do that.
Absolutely. And wonderful to hear that you had this flexibility to sort of design your own curriculum along what you were most interested in. I think that is fantastic.
I then went to Paris because my husband then had a job in Paris, and I went over as a postdoc, following him really, not knowing what my future career was going to be. And it was then that the very beginning of the new genetics, so-called DNA sequencing and so on, was just beginning. And I'd never done biology. I didn't really know what genetics was. But just talking to people in the lab about what could be in the next decade the human genome was just so fascinating. I haven't looked back since, actually.
So can you tell us a little bit more about what you worked on when you were over in Paris at the Saclay?
I worked on cloning, identifying RNA polymerase genes in yeast. And the reason I did that was because I'd never done any biology. I hadn't even done biology at school. I needed to learn something about proteins as well as something about DNA. And I deliberately went to a lab that was very good at protein chemistry. And I learned so much during that period.
Well, that is wonderful. So can you think of any other, I guess, maybe turning points or really milestones along your career that got you to where you are today?
Yes, probably meeting a DMD student, because actually Bob Williamson recruited me back to London because I was interested in genetics. A cystic fibrosis research fellowship. Now, CF is one of the most common genetic diseases. 1 in 20 of us are carriers. And so we went up and down the country and bled every patient. And we started to do very early genetics on those families. And then it was much too difficult a problem. So we decided to study Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy because we knew that only boys were affected. Therefore, we knew it's probably on one of the chromosomes, the X chromosome, because boys only have one and girls have two. So if they got a defect, they can compensate for it and boys can't. And then I met my first DMD patient and the executive director of the Muscular Dystrophy group, as it was then, which is the major charity in this country. And they were so inspirational. And the problem was a difficult one, but somehow to me seemed fascinating and tangible. And so here I am many years later. We've done the diagnosis. We developed the first prenatal diagnosis of the disease with colleagues in Cardiff, again, not in the London lab, and with colleagues in Holland. And then we moved on to characterizing what the gene did after the Americans had cloned it. And now we're leading one of the approaches, which is to find a compensating protein to get a cure for this disease. And that's why we set up the company. And it's a very exciting time in DMD research now because we're so close. Not just us, but other people in the world have got different approaches. So between us, maybe we'll make a difference to the lives of these boys at last.
That sounds like an amazing journey through science and really interesting to hear how you pivoted kind of from this interest in chemistry to more of the biology and genetics. So I think that is fascinating. So can you tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing now and a project that you're working on, perhaps related to muscular dystrophy, that you are so excited about?
Well, in 1989, which again seems a long time ago, we discovered a protein that is very similar to the one that's missing in Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy patients, DMD patients, I'll call them for now. And we proved in animal experiments that if you increase the levels in muscle of this very similar protein, which we call eutrophin, then we could essentially prevent the pathology in the mouse model of the disease. And that was a turning point, because that meant that potentially we could do the same in man. And so what we then set up was a screening test to try and find chemicals that could increase the levels of this protein, modulate its expression, so we could take it to the clinic. And in collaboration with this company, with the chemists Steve Davis and Angie Russell and co in the chemistry department here, we've been able to identify several molecules, one of which is now in phase 1 clinical trial. So we're just doing the safety profile now. It looks very good, and we're really excited about taking that through to the next phase.
Well, that sounds like an incredible project and so exciting to hear that you're sort of moving ever closer to this cure. I think that's fantastic. So can you tell us a little bit now about how you balance all these different hats that you wear, so to speak? And you mentioned you're involved in this biotechnology company as well as your work at Oxford. You know, how do you balance it all?
I think working with the biotechnology company is part of the science, because you have to translate it to somewhere, and some other people have to take it to the clinic, because I couldn't do that. I don't have those skills. So that bit isn't difficult. I think fitting it in with trying to also help the strategy of British science through being deputy chairman of the Wellcome Trust, trying to help the strategic development of all the opportunities in global health that there are today through a large charity like the Wellcome Trust, to be able to participate on scientific advisory boards of companies that are also developing techniques to treat muscular dystrophy. ProSense is one of those in Holland. I think the great thing here is that science is never a lonely subject. Well, it certainly isn't in genetics. Every year, everyone gets together, at least one annual meeting. And it's that spirit of cooperation, building on what other people have done and what you've done yourself, that takes the field forward. That, you know, it's an extremely friendly and exciting thing to do.
Certainly.
Even in the early days of human genome mapping, when we didn't know much about the human genome before it was sequenced, there was that spirit of collaboration that was there.
Absolutely. Well, that sounds incredible. And certainly I'm sure you're quite busy with all these different activities that you're trying to balance, like we described. And I know a lot of scientists struggle with this issue of managing their time and trying to manage their priorities as well. And I know this is one of the challenges that scientists face. So can you tell us about maybe another time in your career where you were struggling with something or where you faced a major challenge? And Kay, tell us what happened and what are some of these steps that you took to get through this tough time to be successful? No one likes talking about the challenges.
No, I was just wondering whether I should say that when my son was born.
Yeah.
I think it was a challenge to be a mother and keep all of my balls in the air. And nature tells you your family comes first. At least it did with me. I had no problem with that at all. But juggling all the things, I think, was a challenge. But, 2 or 3 years into the mission, you suddenly realize that you can organize these things. You can organize the priorities. And, yeah, you can do it. Nothing's impossible. So that's actually a very good story. And I guess every mother goes through that. And I ended up in a situation where I don't need as much sleep because my son never slept till he was 4 all the way through. So he taught me how to really cope with being me as well as being a scientist. And so that's been very advantageous, although initially I think I found it very difficult because you have to have the self-confidence to believe in yourself that everything will get done eventually if you make the right priorities.
So can you tell us what were some of your strategies or what were some of these things going through your mind in those early years before you kind of got everything together, made a plan, and were able to tackle everything at once?
I think it's mentorship. I worked in an institute where the director, who was a clinical scientist, and to watch how he organized his day. I mean, he worked very hard, but most people who are successful in whatever walk of life have to work hard. That wasn't the problem. It's the passion with which he did it. He was completely dedicated to his patients on the one hand, but completely dedicated to the basic science on the other. I think the thing to do is always do things that you'll enjoy. Parts of jobs are always boring, so there's a time when you just have to turn the wheel. But I think you always have to ask your question, is it worth doing this for the world? That sounds a bit grand.
Certainly.
For that particular subject area, if you like. And also, is it worth doing it for yourself? Because if you don't feel it's worth it and you don't test yourself all the time, if you're very busy, you've really got to focus on what's important for you. I think that's what I'm really saying.
Well, I think that is a great way to get through some of these tough times is to have the help of a mentor, to be able to see someone else doing it. I think gives you part of that confidence to know that, all right, if this person can handle it, it's something that is possible. It's something that I could handle as well.
And I did go through a difficult phase when I moved to London. I won't go into all the politics of it, but in the end I resigned from my job in London. But I remember David Weatherall telling me then, you just have to hold your nerve. And the more important thing is also, before you react to a situation, wait for 48 hours and just see whether it's as bad as you thought it was in the first place. And that's also true when people come and complain to you about things now. So wait for 48 hours. Sometimes they solve the problems themselves, in which case I don't have to help them.
Right.
And in other instances, I can look at it from a different point of view. And I think the problem today is that people feel, oh gosh, I've got to solve that now. I've got to respond to that email. I've got to respond to that person. I think it's always better to swallow hard and think about it first. And, I do it myself. You tend to fire off the email because you think you know quickly what the response is, and it may not be the right answer.
Absolutely. I think the 48-hour rule is great for preventing some of those angry emails from sneaking out, too.
It's not just the angry email. Actually, you can just think more carefully. And there's a book from a psychiatrist who coaches the football team. It's a case of just keeping your emotions in check. That's the other thing.
Certainly.
Because, again, there's something you're very passionate about scientifically, or anything in life, really. If you get too emotionally involved, you don't make good decisions. So it's better to wait for you to calm yourself and then think about it. And that isn't always easy to do. And I tend to be impatient, and someone who used to work here used to tell me how impatient I am. And I think you do have to stop and consider it. Don't react emotionally. Try and keep your emotions in check, and then try and solve the problem.
Kay, I think that is fantastic advice for getting through some of these tough times that scientists face. But we don't just want to talk about these challenges, these difficult times. Can you tell us next about a recent success that you've had? It can be a big success or a small success, anything that's really meant a lot to you.
I think scientists have eureka moments. And our eureka moment was when we discovered this gene that I've talked about earlier on in the interview, which is very similar to dystrophin. And Don Love came in, actually it was Sunday morning, and said, well, look at this. It's not on the X chromosome. Well, people listening to this won't know what the implications of that meant. But it meant it was something different from the gene itself that was faulty in the patients. So we suddenly realized, well, this might be interesting. And we were very fortunate because Diana Hill was passing through the lab, and she's a DNA sequencer on her way back to New Zealand, and she was a great friend. And she decided to take this very small piece of DNA, as we had it then, back to New Zealand with her and sequence it. And on Boxing Day in 1988, she texted back to me. She said, it's incredible, Kay. It is so similar to dystrophin. I can't believe it. A bit more of it, and we can confirm this. And that was the beginning of our development of this new strategy for muscular dystrophy.
Oh, wow. So what were you thinking when you got that text, or how were you feeling?
Well, we were unbelievably excited. In fact, I think we drank some champagne then.
Right.
We realised the implications of it. And actually, Don Love is now back in New Zealand because he was a New Zealander. He was the postdoc that was working with me at that time. So he was one of the team.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on that exciting eureka moment. And I think those are just some of those hallmark moments that stand out in your mind when you look back on your career. It's sort of that moment where you had that exciting discovery, or maybe where everything fell into place and things started to make sense. I think those are some of the moments that are just the most exciting to have in your career as a scientist. So great that you were able to share one of those with us today. Now, we mentioned a book previously in our interview that you recommended about sort of controlling your emotions and how to handle some of these tough situations. Are there any other books that you would highly recommend that our listeners check out that you have really enjoyed?
You know, I used to read lots of things. Hermann Hesse. My problem is I don't think I can think of a favourite.
It can be even just a book that you've read recently.
Well, Mandela, if you like.
All right.
Inspirational. Again, it's the tenacity and the self-belief that comes through.
So is this a biography of Nelson Mandela?
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, we will put that on our website for our listeners to check out, and it'll be on our resources tab. So that is a great recommendation. I think one of the other incredible things about careers in science are some of the opportunities that you have to travel. And we mentioned some of your travel during your training, going to the Saclay in Paris and things like that. But I think a lot of scientists get to travel to go to conferences, to work with collaborators. And these are just some amazing experiences because of the places, the people, the science. So can you think back on your career and share with us today your favorite place that you've traveled for science and why it was just so memorable?
The answer to that is, without hesitation, Paris. It's when Steve and I went to Paris, that's my husband then, went to Paris because he had the postdoc, and that's where I first found genetics. I guess I was a stuck-in-the-mud young English woman that was doing science, and the great thing about the French is that they have this great joie de vivre. I guess that's why it's in French. And we realized that when you're across the channel, you can work hard, and you can jump in the car, and you can go to wonderful places in the country. And so we worked hard and played hard. And I remember in those Paris days, we used to, in the winter, get on a coach on Friday night, be on the ski slopes by Saturday morning, ski all day Saturday and Sunday, and then we delivered back into Slack on the coach on Monday morning. And we were discussing science with our colleagues throughout those whole weekends. So it was enjoyable, it was inspiring, and France is a great country. Great language, great literature, and lots of art. Paris was great for art museums and exhibitions that were changing all the time. So I have real fond memories of that city.
Certainly. Do you travel back frequently?
Have I been there in the last 5 years? Once, yes.
All right.
That's because I'm too busy going to other places now. If somebody said, would you like to go away for a long weekend, I'd probably say I'd go to Paris.
Certainly. Well, that sounds like an incredible travel experience. And I love how you're describing being able to experience the culture. And I think when you're there for something like a postdoctoral fellowship, it's nicer than a conference because you have more than a few days to really explore the city, to get to know certain places. And I love these little weekend trips you're just driving to go skiing for the weekend and then back to the lab on Monday. I think that's fantastic. A great way to discuss science outside of the lab and sort of get away for a little while to think about things from a fresh perspective. I think that's great.
I was lucky because the lab I was in, they were very good at mixing that work and play. And so that taught me a lot about work-life balance at a very important age.
So speaking of some of these amazing people that you were able to work with in that lab and over the course of your career, I know scientists, we often get sort of strange stereotypes attached, but I think scientists are often creative, amazing, and just oftentimes very funny people that are wonderful to spend time with. And I think a lot of these groups that you work with over the years, maybe research groups and labs, they tend to sort of develop their own personalities. And oftentimes you get maybe quirky traditions that spring up or just some funny lab memories that you can look back on fondly. So, Kay, can you share with us today one of these maybe quirkier traditions that you experienced in a lab or just a funny memory that you have?
I think certainly labs in Scotland always went for drinks on Friday afternoons. That's not a quirky tradition, and actually I think some Scottish labs still do that. But again, it's another opportunity, a cultural opportunity for people to mix in a different environment. Actually, when we first opened the building I'm currently in, Peter Donnelly, who runs the statistics labs in this building, put in a table tennis table. So it was very important to us to get the statisticians to talk to the molecular biologists and talk to the physiologists that work with Fran Ashcroft, who also helped do the building. It was table tennis on Friday nights, and so we used to put crates of Coke and beer and have a table tennis competition. Now, because we're in Britain, table tennis is very important because you can do that any time of the year. You don't have to wait for the rain to stop.
Right.
That really does work.
So do you still keep up with your table tennis today, Kay?
Well, I don't know.
No.
I've run out of time. I think I'm probably still fit enough, but because that's the other thing. You've got to keep fit to be able to keep up with all of this. If you don't go walking, you have to go to the gym because it keeps the stress levels down and it also enables you to do more.
Absolutely. I think get your endorphins running, keeps you awake, things like that. That's fantastic. So can you tell us a little bit more now? We talked about some of these amazing research questions that you've been able to answer over the years and just some of the incredible people that you've worked with and places that you've gone. And I think a lot of these are wonderful things about the world of science, but there are some constraints, some frustrations I think that scientists face in terms of being able to answer these questions that they're most excited about. So can you tell us today, Kay, if things like funding and staff and technology and feasibility, all these normal constraints on your research, were not an issue, what is one question that you are just dying to know the answer to?
If I was starting my career now, it's very difficult, but I would probably tackle a neurodegenerative disease like Parkinson's. And the reason is because it's got to do with cognitive deficits as well as movement deficits. And the technology is such now, you can watch single circuits, you can optically activate them, you can look at the genetics, you can take out single cells from the brain and amplify the information that they have within them. So if the funding was no option, then I'd probably set up a group around those technologies.
Certainly. So are there particular questions you'd be hoping to answer, like if there's a common cause for these neurodegenerative disorders or if there's specifically in Parkinson's a certain cure?
I would try and understand the basis of the movement disorder in Parkinson's using these latest technologies.
That is a fantastic question.
It's a question that everybody wants to, so it's not very original. Well, all I'm saying is that if there's enough money there, what you have to do now is real big multidisciplinary science in order to get enough information from all the way around the world to move on to the next question. So I think bringing together all of those scientists in an international way is what I would like to do.
Absolutely. So once you find this cure for Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, is Parkinson's next on your list, Kay?
Oh, yes. If I'm still alive. No, I will, because I intend to do muscular dystrophy in short order, I hope. Yes.
Certainly. Well, that is very exciting. And I think fantastic that you're able to start thinking about these next areas of research that you're interested in diving into and all the different sort of new technologies that you can apply to them. I think that's fantastic. So over the course of your career, I'm sure you encountered many amazing people and received a lot of great advice along the way from some of these mentors that you've mentioned throughout the interview. Now, can you think back on your career, Kay, and share with us what you would consider the best advice that you've ever received?
Focus on your strengths, really. And I think women in particular tend to think about all the reasons why they can't do something, whilst almost ignoring lots of reasons why they can. And I was very bad at that too. I still have a tendency to think I mustn't do that, I can't do that, rather than what skills have I got where I might be able to make a contribution. So the advice was given to me is to play to your strengths. Think about what you can really offer in this particular job or scientific question.
Absolutely. And I love that shift from sort of the pessimistic view that I think I suffer from as well myself, thinking, oh, there's no way I could do that, to shifting to think, all right, what can I do? These are the things I can offer. So I think that is fantastic advice. Now, is there any other last piece of advice or last piece of inspiration that you want to share with our listeners now from you personally, Kay?
I think never give up. I was fortunate. I was born in a very sexist age where the opportunities for women were much less than they are now, and it's changing enormously in the right direction. We've still got a long way to go, but whenever it got hard, I was very fortunate to have the support of someone who just told me to go back in there and not worry about it, not necessarily just to fight, but to move on from it. And the other thing is never feel bitter. No matter what they do, you just got to move on. There is no point in feeling bitter when you failed or somebody has done something to you. You just have to move on. Yeah, I've got the right personality for that because I find that relatively easy to do. I don't bear grudges, but I think it's a very good lesson to learn. Just don't feel bitter, move on. There are lots of really good things to do out there, and move on to those.
Absolutely. I think that is amazing advice, and great to hear that you had someone there with you to kind of dust you off after you were knocked down and help you get back up and continue going forward. I think that is so important, to surround yourself with these supportive people in your life who can be there for you when you need them. And I think definitely, I love this piece of advice about not getting bitter, because I think that is sort of a human reaction. You know, when you first get these angry rejections or, you know, bad reviews on a paper or a grant, things like that, your first, I think, instinct is to sort of feel bitter or resentment, things like that. But that's not going to help the situation. You have to put those aside and think about how you can move forward. So fantastic advice there. Now, Kay, can you share with our listeners a way for them to reach out and contact you if they want to learn more about you?
Yeah,
or your
I think
research?
the best thing to do is to look at our website, which is www.dpag.ox.ac.uk, because then you'll be able to see my departmental website and also the website of the MRC Functional Genomics Unit to see, you know, what we can do with genetics and genomics now to start answering important questions, not about muscular dystrophy only, but about autism, about, again, Parkinson's disease. There is a junior faculty member here who used to work with me, has now set up his own group, looking at aspects of Parkinson's disease, motor neuron disease. But anyway, the website will tell you all about that.
Fantastic. Well, listeners, feel free to check out the website to learn more about this incredible research. And Kay, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
Certainly. And thank you to our listeners as well. If you love meeting amazing scientists, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes to make sure you don't miss hearing from one of your colleagues or your science heroes. Join us again next time for another episode of People Behind the Science. Your voyage to the lives of today's exceptional scientists has just begun. You can find everything we talked about today, including our guests' favorite books, biographies, photos, and more, when you visit us at www.peoplebehindthescience.com. I look forward to seeing you next time on People Behind the Science.